Hey, y'all, I'm Shane Sams. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast today. For those who may not know, I'm a self-employed, location-independent, family-focused entrepreneur, and I make my entire living online. That was my dream when I started my business, but this podcast is not about me. I started this podcast to help you find success too by interviewing some of the biggest authors, influencers, and entrepreneurs on the planet. My mission is to unlock their strategies and tactics that my guests use to succeed so you can go out and find your success as well. Which brings me to my guest today, Jared Easley of Podcast Movement. I have known Jared for a long time. We always we know each other from Facebook. I've been to Podcast Movement, and we always send each other messages because we're both big wrestling fans, like professional wrestling. And to see what he has built in the live event space has been absolutely incredible. You know, the name of their event is called Podcast Movement, and they really have created a movement that is impacting the world in a really, really big way. And I know that many people listen to this show, maybe you're an author, maybe you're an entrepreneur, you want to go out, you want to impact the world, you want to create a movement too. Well, I couldn't think of anybody else to talk about starting a movement than my good friend Jared Easley. So we're going to go deep down the rabbit hole today. We're going to talk about the birth and the growth of Podcast Movement, how it became this massive, amazing business, an incredible live event for thousands of podcasters, an amazing virtual community of tens of thousands of people. I think their Facebook group has over 60,000 people in it right now. We're going to go back in time and talk about how Jared and his business partner, Dan Franks, kind of fell into the live event business and how they grew it to one of the most popular live events in the country today. We're going to talk about all the lessons that they learned. We're going to talk about how they survived the pandemic, even though the only way they make money is having a live event, and there were no live events allowed. We're going to talk about how they not only survived the pandemic, but didn't have to let a single employee go during 2020. And then we're going to have some fun. You know, a couple guys that love wrestling are going to talk about wrestling, but we're going to take a little different angle on it. We're going to talk about all of the amazing business lessons that we learned by watching WWE growing up and asking a simple question. What would Vince McMahon do? Man, this is a great conversation. It could have went on for 3 or 4 hours before our schedules kind of ran out of time. But I know you're going to learn a ton of amazing lessons that are going to help you go out and succeed in whatever you're doing, whether you're trying to start a movement in the world or just a movement in your family to take those next steps. You're going to learn how to do that from the founder of Podcast Movement himself, Jared Easley. So wherever you are, grab a notebook and a pen. You got to take some notes. Pour yourself a cup of coffee or a mason jar of sweet tea. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Three, two, one. Jared Easley, what's up, man?
Well, I used to watch He-Man, and I don't know what that has to do with this show, but you were telling me about a book before you hit record.
It has everything to do with this show.
So now you've piqued my interest, Shane. And so this introduction is not what your listeners are used to, but
that's right.
That's what they're going to get.
I record an intro for
okay,
you. People are used to this out of me, right? So I just spent like a month and a half reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, this deep Stoic philosophy book, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't just read it, man. I slowed down, underlined, wrote notes, every word of this thing. I got so into it. And when I remember closing the book, I was just like, oh my God, my brain is I feel like 100-pound weight is on my skull right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ordered this book called Skeletor. All right, it's called What Would Skeletor Do? Diabolical Ways to Master the Universe. So it's like reverse advice. It's like, what would he do in Friends? What would he do in Family? And it's awesome. If you've ever watched He-Man, you just get all these flashbacks of nostalgia. And the dude who wrote it, I forget his name, Rob something. He's got it's just hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. So if you need something light, get it. It's amazing, man.
Sounds super creative. I love it already. So
yeah, man. So what brought that on, y'all, off air, was we were talking about Easley's next greatest work is going to be a book about what he learned in business from wrestling or something. But dude, you just got back from WrestleMania, didn't you?
I did. Well, I went to, okay, there was, as you know, they've now split up WrestleMania into 2 nights, which I think is, from a business standpoint, is super smart. And then from a wrestling fan standpoint, I'm like, why? You know,
I know, right? I love the 9-hour marathon, man. That's the fun part of it, you know?
Yeah, but I'm not complaining, man. It was a wet day. But it stopped raining just in time for the event. And I was with a dear friend of mine named Steve. He's got cerebral palsy, he's in a wheelchair, and he lives for wrestling, Shane. He is couldn't be more of a wrestling fan all his entire life. And I've known Steve for many years now. We've we've gone to a couple of them, and so we got to be at that one, and we had a great time. It was so good, and
just being back in the stadium,
it felt amazing. It really did, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. So.
Yeah, man. WrestleMania is a real special thing for me. Mm-hmm. People laugh when I tell them. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see I have replica belts behind me hanging on my shelf, right?
Absolutely.
Like I'm a huge wrestling fan, but there's just something special about a big event like that. It's the only thing I've ever been to where 100,000 people are in the stands and you feel like everybody's cheering for the same team. Like, even if people like one wrestler over the other, there's just this weird camaraderie in that. I mean, this happens in other niche markets too. Like, we'll talk about it in podcast movement and how podcasters kind of flock together and like things like that. But like, there's just something different about that event that's special. And I mean, when it got shut down, I was sad, man.
Yep. You hit on something that I have joked about with people, but it really is true. There is something about professional wrestling, whether people like it, whether they watch it, whether they care. There's something about professional wrestling that brings people together. And I'm going to give you an example of this, Shane. And when I was younger and I first joined the Navy, I remember it was right after boot camp, and I was at the school I was going to be in for the next year. I was in Connecticut. So Connecticut, I came from Alabama. I grew up there. So going from Alabama to Connecticut, that's, oil and water. That's a different, just a different world. And so I was kind of adjusting. I was, feeling a little bit homesick, and, that was a real weird chapter, just trying to adapt and figure that out. And I remember on Monday nights in the barracks and the big lobby there, they had, this big, massive TV. And sure enough, Raw every Monday night. And that place was packed. And I would look around that room, and it was, the farm kid from Missouri. It was the Hispanic kid from San Diego. It was the urban kid that grew up in the projects in Cabrini Green in Chicago. It was, I mean, the Mormon kid from Salt Lake. It was every possible type of, strange and unique background you could imagine in this one room. And what did we all have in common? We're watching wrestling. And as you pointed out, you're on the same team in a lot of ways. Like, you're cheering for, this one wrestler, and you're booing the bad guy or whoever the villain is. And I kind of chuckled about that. And I thought, wrestling brings people together.
It's the great uniter. Who knew? Right. That's all we needed for world peace, was just everybody to pick a wrestler they love and tune up on Monday nights.
I know. And even my daughter is not immune to it. She's 10 years old. She's got a lot of things that she's interested in. But if I put on a women's, match, like, Asuka, and I'm just throwing out a random person like Sasha Banks or something. If I put that on, she's glued. She can't not watch it.
Yeah. And even if she says she doesn't, when they're walking through, they pause, right? Hey, dude, I'm convinced that wrestling is how I landed Jocelyn as my wife, and she hates wrestling theoretically, right? So I was, when me and Jocelyn met, I had just bought 4 tickets to a double taping, 6 hours of Thunder. WCW Thunder. And I had 4 tickets, and all 3 of the guys that were going to go with me, or all three of the other guys bailed. They had something else going on. I'm like, dang it, man. And so, I'm like, okay, that it just so happened that week I met Jocelyn, and somehow I got her to hang out with me for a minute. We lived in the same dorms, and I was sitting there like, I've got to ask this girl out, man. I've got to ask her out. And I looked over and I saw those tickets pinned to my wall, the old Ticketmaster tickets before they were on your phone. Yep. And I was like, hey, do you like wrestling? She just laughed like, no. And I'm like, okay, I'm in now. And I asked her, I said, well, I got these tickets. You want to go with me? Because all my friends bailed on me. And she said yes. And I was like, all right, she must really like me because she does not like wrestling. And dude, it was the worst experience of her life. Like we went in and this guy came
as Thunder was for many people.
Yes, exactly right. Same thing over and over. Just like the biggest guy on the card was like Raymond. I don't even know who it was. It was some luchador jumping off the cliffs. Yeah. And
I'm pretty sure I just saw Eddie Guerrero 2 matches ago.
Right, exactly. Yeah, did he just come back out? This is a double taping. Same guys, right? NWO's already beat people up twice. And this guy sat next to me, and he was like 600 pounds, man. And you had to climb over him and almost sit in his lap like Santa Claus to get out of your row. And every time one of us would get up, he'd be like, man, I'm so big, I can't get up. Can y'all bring me back a beer or two or a hot dog or something? And I'm like, so I'm shuttling this dude food, and like it was hilarious, man. But she actually had a great time and had fun, and like it was such a good memory. And but that was my first date, man, with my wife. Was a double taping of WCW Thunder at Rupp Arena. Shuttling food for some guy that was wedged in his chair, man. It was
you mentioned podcast movement and podcasting and stuff. Podcast movement wouldn't exist without my business partner Dan Franks, and the reason Dan Franks and I hit it off in the very beginning before any of this stuff ever got started was wrestling. Dan Franks, a lot of people don't know this, he used to be a professional wrestler.
What?
If you do a Google search for Danny Matthews wrestler, you'll see a picture of Dan Franks shirtless and young Dan Franks. and that's one of my favorite things to tell people, because most people don't know that about him. And he was on a path to try to get on WWE and all that, and he got some injuries, and he ultimately was like, I can't keep living like this. And he was, oh my gosh, he was getting in vans and driving from Dallas to Atlanta to work for $25 and get a hot dog in a high school gym,
right.
He was doing these brutal independent shows. He said he went down to Louisiana one time and wrestled in this, random place. And, he and the buddies that were all in this, I guess a van or something, they stopped at this crappy hotel, and he was so exhausted, he went to get in the bed, and there was sand in the bed, like in the sheets. I'm like, geez. But anyway,
might as well be glass if it's sand. I mean, at that point,
exactly. And I'm just like, I can't even fathom that. But he was a CPA, and he was showing up to work on Monday with bruises on his face, and he's not telling people he's a wrestler. So people at his work are like, hey man, everything okay at home?
Is there some spousal abuse going on? Is your wife hurting you?
We know you're the girl you're dating at the time, Jeanette is Hispanic, is that a problem? Interracial dating can have its challenges. I'm just cracking up, but that's how we met was we had that in common. I certainly wasn't a wrestler, but I loved it growing up. And so when he told me he was a wrestler, I was like, okay, this dude and I are going to be cool.
Dude, my roommate in college, there was a wrestling school by a pretty, I can't remember who owned it, in Lexington, because we had Ohio Valley Wrestling was in Louisville, and it was all there. Yeah. So they had this little circuit, and my roommate in college, he went, we were the same way. We watched flipping back and forth 2 TVs, Nitro and Raw, recording them on the VHS to get the double taping, right?
Had to do it. Yep.
He signed up for a wrestling school. And the problem was he was small, man. He was a soccer player, and he just wasn't a big guy. So of course they're like, yeah, you're going to have to be like a high flying luchador guy. So he was all in it and doing the cardio, and he was making it and killing it and doing this. And then finally they put him in the ring, right? And one of the first times he was at the thing, some dude just threw him off the top rope onto there was cardboard instead of mats on the concrete floor in this cell they were in. And he's like, nope, I'm done. That's too much for me. I can't do this anymore. And I'm like, I told you not to sign up, buddy. I told you. So let me ask you this. How did you go from Dan? All right, you meet this guy you're wrestling to podcast movement? Because I telling you, this is shameless plug. I get no money for saying this. I've been in this game now for 10 years. I've been to live events all over the world. Podcast movement is my favorite one to go to. It really is. It's awesome. Man. And how did that come out? Like, where did that come from?
Well, so when I first the way Dan and I met was actually he had a podcast that came out roughly around the same time as mine, and like many podcasters in the beginning, especially during that time. So this has been a while now. It was 2013, I think. So I would look at New and Noteworthy in at the time iTunes, which is now Apple Podcasts, and I would always kind of be obsessed about that. There's like this first 90 days. If you kind of play with the algorithm a little bit, you get certain number of subscribers and you get a certain number of ratings and reviews, then supposedly that's the trick that will propel you into this real estate on iTunes that's prominent and highly visible and can allow people to find your show. Yeah. And all of what I said is not incorrect. There are aspects of that are true. And I got in New and Noteworthy, and I was like, this is a moment, this is a win. And of course, I think people who've been in New and Noteworthy realize, okay, that's not really a win because
right.
New and Noteworthy ends after so many weeks or whatever, and then you see this massive decline in your analytics. People might have been tuning in, I don't know, but they're not anymore. And you kind of think, well, it's because I'm not in this prominent space in iTunes where people can just see my show instantly. But I remember seeing another show that was called Entrepreneur Showdown. It doesn't exist anymore. I don't even think you could probably Google it and you might find it archived somewhere. But at the time, Dan Franks, my now business partner, was doing a entrepreneur interview based podcast. Imagine that. There was quite a bit of those that were popping up at that time. And I was one of them, and he was one of them. But the thing that struck me about his show was it was called Entrepreneur Showdown, and there was really creative artwork. It was like a wrestling like theme. Like
go figure.
And of course I didn't know this guy at all. And he had a co-host, a guy named Joe. And the way it was structured is that, let's say they'd have you as a guest, Shane. They'd bring you on. They'd make custom artwork for the episode where you're like in a wrestling ring and you're all like superhuman buff, like He-Man or whatever. It's a cartoon, type of artwork. And they had like 3 rounds in the podcast episodes. So there's, each round is like a group of different types of questions or whatever. Or maybe first round was them talking about the latest things that were going on. And then the second round was, something else. And then the third round was interview with Shane Sams, So it was structured, in a kind of a creative way that not every other podcast was doing. So I liked their artwork. I liked their format. And I was like, these guys are pretty creative. I need to kind of keep in touch with these people. I need to, befriend them. And so that's kind of the catalyst was they were doing some smart things that when I was scrolling through, making sure my show was a New and Noteworthy, my own vanity metric, my own ego, allowed me to see this other show. And I was like, oh, let me click on this. Let me check it out. And that, is a little bit of a lesson right there. If you put your best foot forward and you kind of, do good work, you're likely to get noticed, for the right reasons. And that's how I first noticed what they were doing. I was going to be attending a conference in Dallas, which is where they lived. And I thought, it would be fun to do a podcast listener meetup in Dallas. But I was like, my show's not that big, and that would be kind of weird if I have a meetup
Right.
and nobody shows up. I knew some people would show up because I used to live in Dallas, Fort Worth for a while. So I had some friends in the area. So I knew I'd have a couple people show up. But I thought maybe it would be even better if I teamed up, so to speak, with this podcast, Entrepreneur
smart.
Showdown, and we co-host a meetup because they're in Dallas. So I'm sure they've got friends and listeners in Dallas. So if their listeners in that area come, and then I've got a couple of friends that show up, we'll have a few people, maybe we'll have 10 people, and that's not bad, because we're both new podcasts, right?
Right.
So I reach out to these guys, and Dan responds, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to this conference, and I was wondering if you guys might want to do a team up and do a meetup. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. So we do this meetup, and Dan puts together like an Eventbrite page or something, and we promote it on our podcast and then our social channels. I'd never done any of this before, just trying something new. And we show up, and that's the first time I'd ever met Dan Franks in person, was at this meetup. And it was really kind of surreal, because we ended up having like 25 people or something that came out on a
crazy, amazing
on a weeknight,
Wow.
And it was a nice mix. Like, it wasn't just all their friends. I had several people on my side there, more than I anticipated. So it ended up being like this really cool vibe. And I'll never forget. I met this guy named Philip, and Philip, this is a funny story. Philip is real gracious. He's this big old guy from Louisiana originally. And he was telling me, yeah, I got this blog. And now, when I look back on it, he was being kind of humble about it. But he was like, I got this blog, and I'm thinking about podcasting, but I don't really know. And so I'm sitting there giving this guy advice. Well, you could do this. I'm like so green and new. I didn't have any.
Hey man, you were one step ahead of him. It didn't matter. That's what it's all about.
In my head, I was, Shane. And later Dan comes up to me, and he's like, hey, I saw you talking to Philip. And I was like, yeah, really nice guy. I hope he, my advice helped him. And he kind of chuckled. He's like, who that is, right? And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, that's PT. He's the guy that runs FinCon, which is like,
that's amazing.
It was just like, this really big conference for financial bloggers,
that's Philip. Phil, right? Oh
yeah,
man. That dude owns FinCon, by the way.
PT money.
That's just PT money sitting over there in the corner. That's hilarious.
So when I found that out, I went up to him, and I'm like, Dan just told me who you are, and of course I've heard of FinCon. And I was like, I feel like a complete tool trying to tell you advice. And he's like, no. He's like, I really enjoyed that, because he's like, usually when people meet me and they know who I am, like they're hitting me up for something.
He's like that too, man. I go on this trip every year with some guys, and we rent a houseboat down at this lake in Tennessee. It's like on the Kentucky-Tennessee border. That sounds fun. And PT came with us last year.
Oh, good.
And he is gracious and humble and a great dude, man. Like, he's like that. Like, and he wants to learn from everybody. But it's just funny because you're just like clueless, like who he is or what he's doing. That's kind of awesome though, man.
So aloof.
He got something out of it. Well, he showed up at the meet. You know what I mean? So it's like
that's something I thought was hilarious too. Like, why did this guy come to this? That's so funny.
Wanted to podcast, man.
But he did, and he was very, like I said, he was kind, and he was like, oh no. When people usually run into me, they're hitting me up for something. You were just trying to be helpful, and you actually did say some things that made me think about a few things.
So you and Dan accidentally pulled off a great live event. And then were you like, after that, like, could we do this on a bigger scale? Like, is that what the conversation went to?
Well, so then we decided, hey, let's try something else that's promotional. So we did a thing that you don't really see many podcasters do. We tried, a mashup. And so a mashup, when I think of mashup, I think Several years back, for people that are familiar with Kid Rock, he had this song come out called, All Summer Long or something like that. And it was kind of a mix of Sweet Home Alabama and Werewolf in London. And this song was like a real big hit at the time. And but it was this mix of the two songs. And I remember thinking, man, that's really creative. And so podcast mashup is basically taking a couple of podcasts and kind of doing something similar. So we hooked up with another friend. Her name was Cynthia, and she had a podcast that was about Pinterest. And we did the holidays were coming up, so we did the holiday mashup. And basically, we had a series of 3 conversations, one on my podcast, one on Entrepreneur Showdown, and one on Cynthia's Pinterest podcast. And for listeners to follow the series, they would have to go to the other shows to listen, to the full series. And the idea is
it's like hopping donut store to donut store. It's like a bourbon trail, but you go down the podcast trail, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And the idea was that, okay, there's going to be a couple of my listeners that haven't heard of these shows, and then they're going to go check them out because they want to follow the series. And some of their people are going to check out my show because they want to follow the series. And so there's like a cross-pollination type thing. And so we did that, and we thought, let's end it. There was a big event in Las Vegas that was in January. At the time, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was called New Media Expo. I don't know if you remember that show.
Oh yeah,
but,
definitely.
New Media Expo is in Las Vegas, and that was a conference that was for like bloggers and YouTube people and social media and had a little bit of podcasting. And so we're like, we're all going to go to this conference in Las Vegas in January. Why don't we do a collective meetup there? And that can be like the end of the holiday mashup, right? So we had done these 3 shows, and now to celebrate it, we're going to have a meetup. So the day before New Media Expo started at the casino just next to where it was at, which I think it was the Rio that year, there was a little bit less nicer casino next door. I don't even remember the name of it, but it had a really sweet bowling alley. I remember that. And so we were like, hey, we're meeting up at the bar at the bowling alley. And we had called ahead and asked, hey, can we have, some of our friends and hang out? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. So that's what we did. And dude, this thing was a home run. Like over 100 people came to this meetup.
Wow, that's crazy.
And yeah, and we met so many people that night, and all we did was just promote it and really trying to target the hashtag and stuff like, hey, if you're in town, this is the night before everything starts, and there really wasn't anything scheduled. So it's like, if you're already in town, come hang out. And so people did. And that was the event where I'm sorry if this is dragging, Shane, but
no, dude, that's why we're here, man. We got plenty of time.
What happened was then we at that conference, we noticed that most of the people we were running into that we were meeting were either podcasters or prospective podcasters, people wanting to start a podcast. And it was kind of funny to me that not even a quarter of the content of the entire conference was podcast specific. It was all this other stuff.
People were craving to get around podcast information, but it was even the trail coming out of New Media Expo was enough to draw them in. Basically.
Exactly. So here's an event that just had a sliver of a track about podcasting. And, I would say a majority of the attendees for that entire event were people interested in podcasting. But, majority of the content of the conference wasn't even for podcasting. So the light bulb went on instantly. Like, there needs to be a podcast conference. And at the time there wasn't one. I don't know why, but there wasn't. And
dude, I'm telling you, I remember this because my first podcast was in 2012. It was actually not it was me, Jocelyn. I launched a podcast called the Coach XO Show for football coaches. Also not they, but like I almost started a blog talk radio thing because I didn't, but then I luckily figured out podcasting first, right? And then Jocelyn started the Elementary Librarian Podcast. Does that sound riveting? But that was but like there was nothing to even try to figure out how to connect with a podcaster back then because it was so new and it just grew so fast that there wasn't anything back then. You know,
elementary library that's like really keyword rich. You know?
Hey man, listen, I'll tell you right now. Listen, God love it. It sounds crazy that anyone would listen to that, but they all listen to it. Those librarians, man, they came and they listened, and that's what propelled our business. So I mean, that's
totally wild. I absolutely love that. That's fantastic. And to your point, back then there really wasn't a central place for podcasters to connect. And so Dan and I didn't have a background in events. We weren't in any way relevant at the time other than we just started podcasts. So we weren't, nobody knew who we were. And we didn't have an email list. We didn't have anything. And we're sitting there having a conversation like, well, we've listened to enough, internet business type podcasts, and we've had enough guests on our shows where, we kind of know how to determine when the market wants something.
Yeah.
Right. And when we're at this event and we're seeing all these podcasters and people are saying, why isn't there a podcast conference? And we're asking ourselves that question. We're like, maybe we could start a podcast conference. Like, how hard could it be?
The naivete of the first time you start a live event.
If we had, if we were to know what we know now, I don't think we would have even touched it. Like, seriously,
thank goodness you didn't know. Thank goodness
we didn't know. Yeah, we were completely just like young and just like, hey, let's do something, and in a sense, you got to be that way. Because there's no guarantees. You can validate and you can do all these things with it. You got to get out there and try. And so we decided, okay, before we, put all this time and energy and money we don't really have into something that will fail, we've listened to enough Pat Flynn to know we need to validate the idea. So we decided, okay, let's do a crowdfunding campaign. But the hilarious thing about that, Shane, is we didn't have an email list. We really didn't have what people would say you need to have a successful crowdfunding campaign. But we didn't let that stop us. We were like, okay, we get on Fiverr or one of those sites and find like a person to create a cartoon type video about, hey, wouldn't it be fun to go to a podcast conference? And you look back now, if you can find that stuff, and it's kind of hokey and cheesy, but it worked. I think if you search on it wasn't Indiegogo, it was the other one. It was,
you need to grab that video and put it on your all's about page, like at the bottom,
yes,
like our first commercial.
Should.
Yeah, man, that'd be good.
Really should. Because it was kind of hokey, but it was basically, wouldn't it be fun to have a podcast conference? And it's kind of silly and not overly impressive. But at the time, we didn't know any better, and we were just,
man. But like I'm telling you though, like what I hear here is so amazing, and I hope that like the story is incredible because I see so many parallels into like my journey or other people's journeys. Like even if you look at Pat's journey, like there's these things that like these clues that keep emerging, and it's like, let's take the next step. Let's take the next step. And then all of a sudden there is a point where I'm sure in this story, like you just said, you're going to get in over your head. And like, that's, but like, that's when you like, oh, those breadcrumbs were true. There was something on the other side of this. And that's what people have got to do, whether you want to be a podcaster, an entrepreneur, an author. Like you just look for those clues and you're like, that looks sort of like the right direction. What would happen if I talked to Dan? What would happen if we went to Vegas? What would happen if we went to the bowling alley and that bartender said, sure, bring a few friends over, and 100 people show up. And all of a sudden it turns into something that you probably didn't set out to create, but it was amazing when you got there.
Oh, absolutely. That was a wonderful summary, because that was exactly what happened. And so we did a crowdfunding campaign, and because we didn't have an email list, we just talked to fellow podcasters that we knew, primarily in the business space. And, we asked the people that we looked up to at the time to see if they'd consider being involved. And a couple of them were straight up told us no in the beginning, which we didn't take personally. We were like, well, who are we? We're nobody, so we got to kind of prove ourselves. And, but we had asked enough podcast friends, hey, will you speak at this? Will you share this with your network? That sort of thing that, we kind of did napkin math. And, again, Dan was the CPA, so he's a little bit better at that than I was. And I had a project manager background. I was like, I think we could figure this out. So we were like, what if, let's dream big here. Let's be outlandish. What if we could get 200 podcasters together? We were like, well, where would we have it? Well, we should have it in a city where it's easy for people from, the West Coast and the East Coast to fly to. It's like, well, Dallas, that's middle, that's a one-way flight for most people. And then they've got more than one airport. They got DFW and they got Love Field in Dallas. And oh, by the way, they had some kind of podcast event there like a year or so ago. It was like one of those WordPress type events, but it was for podcasting. So like a word camp, but it was called Pod Camp or something like that. And I was like, well, that's a little bit of a proof of concept in Dallas. There were enough.
Yeah. Podcasters will go to Dallas in some way.
There were enough podcasters, at least in the Dallas area, to go to this small Pod Camp event. And I was like, I'm sure we could, at least probably match whatever the number was that went to that. That might have been like 100, and we were like, what if we could get 200, like that was in our head. We were like, wow, that would be audacious. So we're like, okay, for a minimum, this wouldn't be enough to put on the event, but it'd be kind of the validator to let us take the next step. So we're like, okay, let's just say 10 grand, and we really, in our minds, thought that was a huge amount of money because we had not ever made that, we just had salary type jobs. And, so we're like, let's see if we can get $10,000. And if we can get $10,000, that's enough proof that we can do the event. So we ask a bunch of friends and we go live with this crowdfunding campaign, and then we get $10,000 in the first day.
Dude, that's crazy.
And we were like, "What? Oh gosh, now we're locked in."
Yeah, there's nothing. Jocelyn always says, "There's nothing that will light a fire under your behind than taking other people's money for something that's not created yet."
It was right? Scary. It was, but in a positive way. Like it really did motivate us. Like we're like, okay, now. We really have to do this. And then at the end of the 30 days of the campaign, we had over 3 times, the number that we were thinking. So,
wow,
like over 30 grand. And that's still, I mean, Shane, as well as anyone, if you're going to put on a pretty decent, reasonably high quality event, 30 grand is still not quite enough.
In 2019, we went over 100 grand for 100 people. And I was like,
there you go.
And I think I sent you a message at one point. It was like, I have no idea how you guys manage the thousands of people or whatever that you guys do, because like 100 people for the 100 grand was like, that stresses us to the max. I just can't imagine running a big one,
It is stressful. People that don't think it's stressful, they'll learn if they try it. But yeah, so we put this thing on, and then we have the event in August, and we put our best foot forward, given the fact that we didn't know what we were doing. And over 600 people came to that first event.
I've never heard that story. That's an amazing story.
And so we were all like blown away, and it was a really positive event, and we made a lot of mistakes like anybody would. And we learned from that. Like we took copious notes, and we're like, okay, if we do this, when we do this again, we're not going to do that again. We're going to fix that. And then, we started to learn, okay, how do the big boys do this stuff? So again, we talked to our friend PT, and we're like, hey, if you were to do this all over again, what advice would you give us? And he's like, well, I would avoid this. I would do this. And we just kind of soldiered on. But when we did the math after that first event, we were break even. And that to me was deflating. I was like, oh man, we had this amazing event. Everybody's like singing our praises, and yet we have nothing to show for it, But then as we learned and talked to other people that do events, like, we broke even. They're like, dude, that's phenomenal. Most people lose money on their first event.
I lost 30 grand on the first time we did Flip Your Life Live. And I was like, we got to fix that. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the fact that we broke even was like a positive, like, no, like it didn't quite feel that way. Cause you work hard on something, you want to see some kind of return on it. But at the same time, I was encouraged. And I remember my wife was like, this is a waste of time. I saw how many hours you put into that and we didn't get anything. Like, what's the point? So I love my wife, and she has been the voice of reason many, many times in my life. And thank goodness for Rachel. But I knew in that particular moment, okay, Rachel is not right about this one. Like, yeah. I'm going to have to figure out how to get her on board, because this is validated. There's something to this. We're not turning back now. We know there's something to this. So we pressed on doing our day jobs, working like a second full-time job on top of that, planning the next event. Cause at the time it was just Dan and I,
where was the second one?
The second one was in Fort Worth. So, those first 2 years it was, Dallas and then Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And that one doubled, Shane. Like, we had twice the amount of attendees, and man, the word was out, and we were starting to sell, exhibitor booths, and even more so than the first year. And there was a number of things that happened. We were real excited, and we got approached by Glenn Beck, who some people will know. Like, Glenn Beck, his people contacted us. Hey, Glenn Beck wants to speak at Podcast Movement. And we were like, well, we're not going to say no to Glenn Beck, whether we like him or not. Like, the guy broke away from a major news network and started his own. And podcasters can learn from this guy, Well, he was super gracious, and he wasn't even going to like charge us to speak. And we were like, man, this is a home run for us. Well, he did a little promo video, and we put this video out to our community and our little bit of a email list that we had at the time. And there was a lot of people that just straight up revolted and said, we will not come if Glenn Beck is there.
Why?
Like, cause there were certain, folks that are leaning in a certain stance politically. And that was a wake up call, because we're like,
we have this balancing act we have to play with our audience now.
Never even occurred to me, Shane. It never did.
Because you're sitting there thinking that guy's got a huge audience. Like, if you just figure out, like, forget what he believes. Like, what's he doing? Like, what's his team look like to run something like that? Like, that's exactly
what we were thinking. Yeah, like, okay, this is applicable. And man, this guy's a huge name, and this is a great win for Podcast Movement, and I think podcasters can learn from this guy. But that was not there were plenty of people that were like, oh, cool, Glenn Beck, but then there was just this this vocal minority that was just pitching a fit. And then we were like, what do we do? Well, as fate would have it, Glenn got sick or ill, or he had some kind of vocal, I don't remember exactly what happened.
He bailed. He
had to bail. Yeah, he had to bail. And it wasn't malicious or he was holier than thou or anything like that. He couldn't fulfill the commitment because of some kind of ailment. And it was pretty close to the event. It might have been like 3 weeks before the event. And so we're like, what do we do? What do we do? And we're like, well, let's take let's try a Hail Mary. Let's reach out to, at the time, one of the biggest things in podcasting was President Obama at the time had done a podcast with Mark Maron in Mark Maron's garage. And that was a huge podcast, like had millions and millions of downloads. It's probably at the time, the most downloaded podcast ever. And so we're like, what if we could get Mark Maron? Let's try, why not? So we reach out and finally figure out how to get in touch with Mark Maron, and they tell us the price tag to have Mark Maron interviewed on stage. So not even a presentation, but just to have him show up and be
asking questions,
interviewed on stage, where he just, is just answering questions on stage. But because he had just done that interview with the president, it was timely, and it was like, okay, if we replace Glenn Beck with Mark Maron, like that kind of saves the face of the show. That renews the faith of the people that are, kicking and screaming about Glenn Beck. And this price tag, I'll share it now. I wouldn't have shared it back then, but it was $40,000
for 1 hour or whatever.
Minutes, And I remember thinking, oh, like 40 grand. Okay. Let's just bite the bullet on this one. Let's do it. So we agreed, and we started promoting Mark Maron, and people were happy and excited. And again, because that was, riding the momentum of him just interviewing the president. And we had the event, and sure enough, Mark Maron was there. And not only was he there, but like he was actually like hanging out at the event, which blew my mind. Like I figured he would just, show up to speak and that would be it. But he came to the party, took selfies with people.
Get out of here. That's great.
I mean, he was taking people to lunch.
That's how you do it.
He was really gracious and cool. Well, he's making decent money to be there. But it all played out and it worked out, and it was everybody was thrilled. Our exhibitors were thrilled. Our sponsors were happy. The people that spoke at the event were like, I spoke at an event with Mark Maron, and like,
oh yeah, I shared a stage. I shared that stage with Mark Maron.
Exactly.
Even though I spoke 3 days later over at the other room, shared a stage. Shared it.
The room on the far end of the hotel.
We were in the same building. It counts. It counts.
It does.
That's how the speaking world works. You know what I'm saying?
That is it. Yeah, I would do the same thing. Like I spoke with Seth Godin. No, you didn't.
Yes. 3 days early and in the ballroom B. But whatever. Same building.
The B team. Yeah, that was a joke. Right. A very quick tangent. My buddy and I, we go to Hooters, and we're always like, when we get to Hooters, and of course, it's the cute waitresses or whatever. So if it wasn't like that, all the cute girls working that shift, it was like we joked and said, okay, this is the B team.
That's the lunch crew. That's the trainees.
These are the lunch crew. They're cute, but they're not as cute.
I'll tell you what, it's funny when you go to like an all-inclusive, like down in Mexico. Yeah. It's so funny, Mike Jocelyn,
which I have, by the way. I love those places,
dude. It's like amazing. Like it's half the price of going anywhere else, And Jocelyn's like, when we go to lunch, it's clearly the people training, not even close. Like you're ordering French fries and they're bringing you like, Brussels sprouts. I mean, it's like, and then they're the ones that can't quite speak English yet. You know what I'm saying? And like, but we always tip those people good because I'm like, man, those are the trainees. You got to keep them going. And then at night, it's like people that are like fluent in 7 languages. And like, they come up and they're like, I know what you want. And they just tell you what you want, and they can bring you your food. So
and they knew exactly.
It is, man. You got to be on the B team before you can be on the A team. And no matter what you're in life, you got to do that. So
sorry to get on that tangent, but long story short, the second event was a smash. It was a home run, even more so than the first year. And so I'm thinking, yes, finally, we're going to see some fruit from our labor. Well, we did all the math, and because of the 40 grand to pay Mark Maron, we actually lost money.
Yeah.
And so not only did we not make money, we lost money. And that was a gut punch. And I think
what year was that?
That was 2015.
See, that's right when Mike McCallis wrote Profit First. And see, when you just the greater agenda of the universe and profiting hadn't come out yet. So you know what I'm saying? We had
not read that book apparently because I mean,
his profit last. His profit last, man.
Yeah. And the positive that came out of that, Shane, was so positive, and it just essential and critical lessons that we had to learn at that particular chapter of this whole cycle of this, life cycle. We had to learn that then, because what we learned that year was so critical toward how we would do podcast movement moving forward. And the mistakes we figured them out. Okay, we made a massive mistake here. We made a mistake here. There was several big mistakes that we had made where we could very quickly see this is how we lost the money.
Yeah.
And
which may not have been as clear in the first one because you didn't have enough data at that point, right? So just got to keep going.
Exactly. So at this point, we're licking our wounds and we're like, okay, all we can do is learn from this. Let's learn from it. So we figured out, okay, one of the big things was affiliates, believe it or not. It'd be like, hey, affiliates is a good thing. But in this case, affiliates, we were paying affiliates who promoted us and got people to come to the event, but these are people that we would have gotten anyway. So they bought their ticket through, and I'm going to say John Dumas, but I'm not in any way hating on John Dumas. But let's say, John Dumas from Entrepreneur on Fire is promoting podcast movement, and anybody that clicks through his link, we give him a commission for that. Well, then we were kind of cutting off our own arm because a lot of those people that bought through him would have come anyway. And we would have made that money instead of paying it out. So we had to, that's just one little example. I could name others, I won't, but we just figured these things out and we're like, okay, moving forward, we can't do this. We can't do this. We have to, put up guardrails here. And that needed to happen, Shane, because, in business, sometimes you gotta hit those little, run-ins so that you are wiser and you don't know till you get there.
And what I've learned is no matter how many times people tell you those mistakes, like it's awesome to learn from other people. I'm not saying this, but like until you feel it, you really don't know. It's how like when you hire too many people for something or when you don't hire enough people for something or like until you really feel it and then learn like, okay, that sucked, but I will never make that mistake again. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like when you feel it, it's going to set in a lot stronger, which is why you got to go do it. And you just got to take it on the chin sometimes, get in the ring and see what happens.
That is exactly what we did. We're like, okay, we're going to, we're going to learn from this. And we did, we learned from it and we fixed it. And, we just said, okay, we're all in now. We've got 2 of these, we know it's working. But we had not been paid up to that point. And, so year 3 was Chicago, and
I was there. I came to that one.
Chicago,
that was my first podcast movement, baby.
Yeah, that was amazing. Another great event. We learned about working with union. In certain cities, there's union labor and there's stuff. That is something we had not run into yet. And so there was things we learned from that event. But that event was profitable, and we actually made money for the first time. Now we had a decision. Well, let's pay ourselves, and then Dan was like, not so fast. let's take what we made and let's put it into next year. Let's just keep making better. I mean, we've gone this long without making anything. I know it stinks, but let's have the bigger picture in mind here, because if we could set this up the right way, we'll be able to totally quit our jobs and do this full time. Well, that took a lot of discipline, Shane, because I was desperate, I mean, I don't like to admit that, but I was. And I was having a really hard time, convincing my wife that this was the right move based on no payouts for all this work. And, but in my heart and in my mind, I knew this is not a work in vain. This is gonna come together. I have to be patient. I have to bear with this. And that was a hard thing to explain to people that loved me. So if you fast forward, there was a lot of decisions made that were hard decisions, but wise decisions. And that ultimately led us to have several successful events back to back to back to back. And, fixing things as we learned each year. And then finally we had enough of a runway financially where Dan and I had the serious conversation. Okay, at the beginning of this next year, that would have been 2018, we can, for 6 months, let's bet on ourselves. Let's quit our jobs and let's go full-time a podcast movement. We got enough payroll for 6 months. And I believe if we're doing this full time, like, and only focused on this, I know we can, make this work.
Isn't that a weird question? Man, I hear that statement you just made so many times from entrepreneurs. Like, there's that moment where you look at, like, me and Jocelyn had this exact conversation. You look in the mirror and you say, man, if we're doing this part-time, what would happen if it was full-time? Not just the money, but like the impact, and like, if we can get 1,000 people now, could we get 2,000, 3,000? Like, and it's like, I hear that over and over and over again. But sadly, I hear a lot of people say, but what if it doesn't work? And they don't do it. And then they never ask the question, like, what if it does work? Right. And, so that's such a common thing I hear with entrepreneurs.
Oh man. And I get it. And the last thing I'd ever want to tell your listeners, or someone who's an aspiring entrepreneur, or just got that side hustle and hadn't gone full time with it yet, is I'd hate to give them bad advice and then something not work out for them. So I totally understand that. I think the thing that encouraged us, Shane, is we had validation behind it, and we knew, okay, this isn't just our first rodeo now. We've done this a few times.
Too. Yeah,
and we have actual money in the bank, and it's good. We can make it stretch for 6 months. We could pay ourselves. And if for 6 months, if we can't, make this work, then we know, okay, this may not be worth continuing in the same fashion.
And you'd have no regrets because you tried.
Definitely no regrets, because we would have put everything we could have put into it, not everything, but we wouldn't, sell the farm, so to speak. But, we would have really put our best foot forward. And so we did, we bet on ourselves, and that January of 2018 went full time, and we've been full time ever since. Never looking back. And not only that, but now you fast forward, we've got a team of people. We've got staff. We've got, folks that are based in the Dallas area. So we have kind of a central office there, although with, the pandemic, not everybody's going to the office, but then we got a number of people that are virtual. And, that's amazing now to look back at that and see, wow, that it couldn't have gotten to where it is had we not gone through those tough lessons and those really challenging things.
What's your wife think now? What's your wife think now, looking on the other side of it?
So I don't mind sharing this with you, Shane, and I have not shared this on any podcast, and this is in no way to brag. It's not coming from a place of ego, but she, and I give, I'm a man of faith. I give full credit to the Lord, for helping us. And she was a full-time registered nurse in the labor and delivery unit. And that's
good money right there now.
That's not, a bad occupation and career. And she doesn't work and hasn't worked now for, over 2 years.
That's awesome.
And to be able, as a husband, and I'm sure there'll be listeners that relate to this, to be able to say, okay, you don't have to do this anymore. We look at our, if we're prudent and we're smart with our money, we'll be able to be in a position where you can stay at home. And I'd always wanted to give that to Rachel. Always wanted to give that to her, but I didn't have it. We didn't, we had to have both of us working. And so to finally be in a position, say, no, we look at here's the math, here's the numbers, here's what's in the account. We can do this. And that's, I think, when we started making money, she was happy, but when she realized, okay, I can actually leave this job and stay at home, like that was, I think, the massive aha for her, is that's when it really turned a corner for her.
Well, the hard work turned into choices, and that's really where you're trying to get to, man. You're trying to get to a point of choice. Like, like we always talk about, like it's not like, oh, you don't have to work. It's like, if you want to, you can. If you don't, you don't. And we have the choice. And that's what success gets you, really. It just gets you choices.
But as a husband and as someone who, I'd always felt a little guilty that, man, I should be able to make enough money for her to stay at home, but I just didn't at the time. And that always kind of irked me a little bit, because it was like, I hated that. I wanted to offer her that, and I couldn't. And to be able to finally offer her that and have her to be able to to come home and not have to, work these insane hours. And it was just such a nice thing. And I'll always be grateful for that. And then there's been a lot of blessings that have come from that. I won't get into all of them, but just, maybe I'll share someone with you offline, but just wonderful things that have happened. And, now I look back and I just think, man, I'm so thankful that we had the courage to take that step of faith, and then to stick it through, even when it was ugly, and even when it was, even when we felt beat down, and like, we didn't let that stop us. And, there are a lot of people that would say a partnership is, maybe you don't want to do a partnership. Partnership's the only ship that doesn't sail. And I can honestly say,
or a partnerships, or what's the only ship that sinks? A partnership.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah. And I'd heard Dave Ramsey, I believe, say that.
Yeah. He says that all the time.
But in my case, that's not true. Like Dan, I couldn't have asked for a better business partner. He's just been phenomenal. And he's just worked so hard, and I'm more the dreamer type guy, and he's more the get it done kind of guy. And then I'm helping him get it done. And it's just been a great connection and a great synergy and collaboration, and hasn't always been perfect. We've butted heads, and we've had to work through stuff. And, but now we're in a position where, eventually someone came along and wanted to help us financially. So they bought a percentage of the company, and now they've got deeper pockets. And so that's put us in a position to buy, to hire
Invest.
staff, and
do things like that.
and kind of, and that happened right before the pandemic. So the pandemic hits, and yes, we had to, kind of be a lot more careful with our spending and things, but we didn't have to let go of any of our staff, Shane. We didn't have to,
dude, that's crazy, man.
We didn't have to do any of that.
Think about that, because man, I shot you a message sometime like right after the pandemic started. I was like, because I was thinking about all my friends that were in the speaking and live event industry, and I was like, dang man, they're struggling. They got to be like stressed out the max right now, And to think about it, like you literally have a company that does what it does live, and then all of a sudden the government and the world tells you, nope, you cannot be live anymore. And to hang on to your people through that, and to have the commitment from your partners to stick through and stuff like that, dude, that's amazing, man. Like, so I don't want to dwell on the pandemic, because I feel like I feel so much hope and energy in the world right now. You know what I'm saying? Like we're coming out of it, man. But like now that you're seeing kind of now we're coming out of this, like the vaccines are rolling out, people's confidence is coming back. I can feel it when I go outside now that the world's kind of opening back up. Like, are you guys, well, let's talk about the real quick pivot you all made to Podcast Movement Virtual, because I was really honored to be able to participate in that. It was amazing how organized that event went, and you guys really threw that together really fast. What did you learn from making that quick pivot in a time of crisis that could like benefit you guys in the future, this virtual live event with your regular live event?
Well, that's a great question. And so it wasn't just a pivot for the live event, but we also realized, we have all our eggs in an event basket. Now you can't have an in-person event. So we need to be more versatile. And so not just doing a virtual event, but then starting to figure out, okay, we need to figure out other streams of income that make sense for what we're doing. And so that kind of put us in the path where now we're doing newsletters, and
nice.
Newsletters have been awesome. Like we've grown,
email or print,
email newsletters.
Nice.
And they've grown, and they're niche, and we sell ads on them, and they bring in revenue, and it's taking a little bit to kind of get it going, but it's going now, and it's working, and it's not necessarily made up for any lost, live event income, but it's been enough income where we haven't had to, be in a bad position or whatever. And now it's growing. So, and then there's other things like professional services, where we have a team of people that can do virtual events and live events. And we've had companies that are familiar with Podcast Movement, how high quality and good the events have been executed, which I totally don't take credit for, that we have a team that helps us do these things, and they are phenomenal. And we've had companies that are like, hey, will you help us with our virtual event or with our in-person thing?
So you can kind of sell out some capacity, like in the off seasons, basically.
Yeah. So and this was starting to happen pre-COVID, where companies were saying, hey, we've got this event, or we've got this award show, or we've got this thing. Can your team, I know you guys do podcasting, but can y'all do, a quality event for us? And so then we're doing professional services too, Shane. So it's like awesome, because these things, we were just able to kind of figure things out where we could expand a little bit, but within our, still stay within our lane.
And you didn't have to, like in a normal season of your business, you wouldn't have had, I mean, you might have thought these were good ideas, but maybe there was no reason to try them because you're just focused on podcast movement. That's exactly right. In this season of crisis, you're like, okay, well, let's take the ideas out of the idea bucket and let's build something. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, that's totally sustainable, even now that we're about to open back up. Pretty cool.
Yeah. So to answer your question, we had to go virtual because, that was the right thing to do. And we'd had people, who were supporting us, and we didn't want to let them down, and really trying to avoid having to give back a bunch of refunds and stuff, because we needed that money to kind of, float us. And so we did our absolute best to put on what we thought was the best type of virtual event that we could put together. And it came together really well, and we were real pleased with it. And we used a couple of different platforms online, and we had our event, and it was, over a 2-week period, one kind of 2 days each of the weeks. It was 4 days total, but it gave a little bit of a breathing room and a gap, so that it wasn't like this really exhausting virtual fatigue type of experience. And it went really, really, really well. And we had Mark Cuban as one of our keynote speakers. And, I've always really enjoyed,
does that mean I've shared a stage with Mark Cuban, even though I'm claiming it? And Mark, where I say virtual stage, baby. I'm claiming it.
I speak at events where Mark Cuban speaks. And
that's right.
How dare you not give me tribute? That's exactly the attitude you should have, Shane.
That sounds like a wrestling line. How dare you not give me tribute? That's brother.
we have learned so much from wrestling, man. We haven't even gotten into that, but that's that event was successful. We were doing a daily newsletter in English, and I was like, what if we make a summary of the daily into one weekly email, and we translate it in Spanish, and we start a Spanish newsletter? And hey, let's try it out. So we hire through Upwork, we hire this guy in Colombia, and we create a Spanish newsletter, and then we start promoting it, the best we can figure out how. And now that newsletter is got almost 7,000 people on that list.
That's crazy.
And we get ad revenue from that newsletter, when all it is repurposed from our daily newsletters that are going out. It's just a compilation or a curated version of that newsletter.
Isn't it amazing?
Into a weekly.
The things that birth from crisis. Isn't it incredible? But we should want crisis and catastrophe. I swear, the more I hear that, I'm like, dude, when you see that coming, it's like, oh, get excited, because the ideas are going to flow from that, man. You should embrace it.
That idea, I'm not even kidding, came from wrestling. In wrestling, they always have the Spanish announce table, and it's like that's we're joking about Dan and I are joking about the Spanish announce table, and then it just kind of clicked in my head. It's like, we should have a Spanish newsletter. Why don't we just try this? But I know that sounds silly, but wrestling really has had an impact.
All right, we're gonna have to talk about that here in a second. We're gonna close this up here in a minute with our most important lessons that we've learned from Vince McMahon and professional wrestling. Oh my gosh! But I do have one more question I really want to ask you for sure. Is so I think that just as the live events in the world and the in-person things, whether it was restaurants or wedding planners or podcast movements or whatever, were the first to get hit by this thing, right? I think that also now there's a flip where you guys might have the strongest barometer or thermometer on the temperature of what's happening in the real world now that we're coming out of this. like so Podcast Movement is coming back live. We're getting ready to, be in person again. Are you seeing the hope and the mood and all this emerge? Like, are people really like dying to get back out is there still some hesitancy? Like, what are you seeing in the live event world post COVID that's coming?
There is that's a really good way. You kind of set it up perfectly. That there is a percentage of people that say I'm not ready, and then there's a lot of other people that are saying I can't wait. I'm there. I don't care. Let's do it. So obviously we're going to be safe about it. Mask and
we're not done
yet.
I want to make sure everybody doesn't think I'm dismissing anything. I've had my vaccine. I had COVID. It about killed me, put me in the hospital. Yep. So I get it.
I'm glad it did.
But I'm also ready to go somewhere and do something.
Exactly. So I'm vaccinated as well. Our team's vaccinated, and we're excited, and the sponsors are excited, and so the feedback. Most of the feedback is positive. And then you got the folks that are kind of on the fringe. And that kind of ties back into your previous question. We tried this virtual event, a live streaming event in 2020. And now we're doing more of a hybrid where it's a live event, but we're also having a live streaming component, which we had never done up to this, or we had tried in Orlando on a smaller scale. Orlando was our 2019 event. And so now we're doing this hybrid where it's an experience that's in person, but there's also a virtual component to it for the people that just can't travel, or they're not allowed to because their country won't let them yet, or they're still waiting it out a little longer. They can still be involved and have a virtual experience that's really positive and that's kind of tailored toward them, but still lets them be a part of it. And there's networking components to that. There's expo hall components to that.
That was really cool in Podcast Virtual, because I did some other virtual events and I met a few cool people like through that stuff. Like just like, like it was amazing how you all did that. That was really good.
So that, as you said, there's things that we learned and we tried in the pandemic that now will apply to what we do moving forward. And that's one of them. And so it's really cool because I get emails from people and they're like, man, I'd love to go. I'm just not ready. Or, finances are tough right now because I'd lost my job and now I'm starting another one. And, things happen. And so it's really cool to be able to write that person back. Like, I totally understand. We have a virtual ticket. And if you still want to participate, you're certainly welcome to. Here's the link. If not, no worries. And then you see, a day or two later, that person just signed up for the virtual ticket. And it's like, all right.
Yeah. It may expand your footprint bigger than you ever could have imagined.
It could. I don't know that it will, but I don't know that it will, but it could. And there's some cases it already has. So yeah, I'm really excited about it. The hotel kind of has restrictions that update every 14 days. And so there's certain restrictions right now where we kind of know, all right, we will be able to do this. We can't do this. And we got to go by that until it changes. So by August, a lot of that may be lifted. We'll find out. But even if it doesn't, we're going along with what the restrictions allow. And so it's going to be as safe as we can make it. It's going to be.
I'm gonna be there. I know that.
I'm
ready to go, baby. I'm ready to rock. I am.
And I appreciate that. And it's going to be great. But we're not blowing this off like, okay, nobody, this isn't a big deal. We're still treating this with great care and sensitivity and considering, all the things that need to happen to make this safe and make it, something where people can come and feel comfortable and within the rules.
A lot of people went the opposite direction. They're just blowing it off. And I appreciate that, man, because like, I mean, like that's the thing is with all of COVID, it's like, I'm telling my kids, like, look, this happened. This is a line in your life that will never go away. Everyone for the rest of our lives, we will keep time before and after 2020. It's just the way it will work. But at the same time, we've had a miracle with modern technology and the vaccines. It's going to spread out. Life must happen, right? Even if it looks differently. And like, I think that's what you guys are doing a great job. Like, yeah, life is going to happen, but it's different now. And we respect that. But we also know life's got to keep going. So
Exactly. So I'm pumped, Shane. I'm reinvigorated. I get days where I'm kind of weary or whatever, but for the most part, man, I'm really this particular season of where we're at in podcast movement is to me the most exciting. Like this is like, okay, now we a lot of the craziness, we're past that point now. So now you kind of get to enjoy it,
Yeah, man.
And
You got
I
support
am.
and staff and team to help you, so you can kick
Yeah.
back and do something, and then they get to enjoy it. And and what's it like? You're from, what'd you say? You're from Alabama, is that right? You're
Mhm.
originally, yeah.
Yep.
What's it like? I'm a Kentucky boy. You're an Alabama boy. I'd say we grew up similar places. Like, isn't it cool to be able to pay people a salary? It's amazing, right? I mean, it's like, how does that even possible that we get to do stuff like that?
And that's humbling too, because these people depend on this, and their families depend on this, and you don't want to let them down. And
yeah, man, I wake up every day with that on my mind, dude.
So that is always on my mind. It's like, okay, I don't want to let my family down. I don't want to let these people that are depending on us for their salary, their livelihood, I don't want to let them down either. And so I'm going to really do what I can to the best of my ability to try to make sure, things are done, and we continue to build this thing and go in the right direction. And so it does, it motivates you. It just says, okay, I want to be responsible, and I want to be caring,
and for the people too. Like, I mean, I know that, like, for example, I at Podcast Movement, the first year that I'd ever been there, I think that was one of the biggest events I'd been to at that time. And I met this lady. I'll give her a shout out. Her name is Cheryl Tan. Okay.
Yeah.
And Cheryl Tan is just an amazing success, just a great woman, right? Yeah. She joins our community right after Podcast Movement.
Cool.
And in a workshop, she had met some ladies. Dude, I just interviewed her on my podcast last week. I brought their entire mastermind on the show. Oh, they've been together 3 years. And I'm just sitting there thinking, like, I would not have made that connection without Podcast Movement. Cheryl would not have joined my community without Podcast Movement. She wouldn't have made that connection with those ladies. They talk on Voxer. They call themselves the Voxy ladies. And it really changed their life. Like, they literally credit the surviving the pandemic because they had their mastermind together.
So good.
And it's amazing like that. I know it's heavy and I know you feel it, but like, man, just the responsibility of providing that one opportunity a year for things like that to happen. Like, that's pretty epic, man. That's a life well lived with a lot of mission, purpose, and passion, dude.
It's having an impact, and I can't take credit for it, but I love stories like that. We hear them, fairly often, and because of Podcast Movement, now this happened, and it's really humbling. It's amazing.
All right, let's talk about Vince McMahon. All right, so we're going to talk about, just think of a couple lessons, or forget WWE. All right, so I'll start because I got one. I was just sitting here thinking about it. I think one thing that I have definitely learned from wrestling is to never be afraid to try something. And I know this comes from wrestling because I grew up watching the gobbledygooker on Thanksgiving, some wrestler in a chicken suit. I've seen so many people that get hit in the pie in the face or get dressed up like Santa Claus. And then a few years ago, they put the Miz in a Colonel Sanders suit and made him go out in the middle. It wasn't even on TV. It was during the break. They made him go out and wrestle a chicken, right? And I'm like, if that's, dude, you just got to throw as much mud on the wall. And if it works, you do it again next year, right? But like, you can't be afraid to try something, even if it's the stupidest idea ever. And I have never been afraid to try new things, like on my podcast or anywhere. And I think that comes from wrestling all those years, just watching people get hit by 2x4s and set on fire. And like, they try so much on those shows. They're just fearless every single Monday, and they've been doing it for 50 years, and it's not gotten old yet. So I think that's definitely a lesson I learned so far from wrestling.
So one example we took from wrestling is, like, we used to have just the MC introduce our keynote speakers. And then we were just trying to think, how can we do this better? And we're like, what would Vince McMahon do? We really did ask that question.
Yeah,
and we're like,
WWVD, baby.
What
would Vince do?
Yeah, when the champion or whoever the big person is coming out, they're on the jumbotron, and so we kind of like, okay, we need to have like a sizzle reel for our speakers when they come out.
That's
so
amazing.
It's not left up to the responsibility of the ring announcer, so to speak, or the MC. You
to
know,
hype them up or whatever.
yeah, we don't, yeah, the MC shouldn't have to hype them up. Let the video hype them up. And then it's just like, okay. And so that's just one example of many, many examples where we've asked ourselves, what would Vince McMahon do? And we've came up with a really good solution that now we will continue to do moving on.
And I bet they feel good about it too. It makes them feel kind of hyped themselves coming out and hearing the hype reel, you know?
Oh, they love it. Yeah,
have you've been to a lot of wrestling. You've been to Raws and stuff, right? You've ever been to like Raw and SmackDown? So one thing I learned before our live event, and it was really good, is like right before, like you go, like there's always commercials right at Raw, and they don't want the stands to be like empty like at halftime when they come back from commercial break and all that, right? So they always like play the little dun, 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 and then the guy goes, well, 30 seconds, we're back on TV or whatever, right? And you see everybody like running back into, it's hilarious. It's like almost like they're trained by the end of the show to know when the commercial's almost over, you know? And when we were doing our first live event, I knew there were going to be breaks, and I was like, well, I don't want the room to be empty. And I remembered going to all these Raws and SmackDowns over the years. So I was like, Jocelyn, we need a clip of me going, all right, guys, we're coming back in like X minutes or whatever. And I picked one song. It was that song by it's called Thunder. You feel the thunder. What's that?
Oh, yeah.
Imagine Dragons.
Imagine Dragons. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So I was like, here's what we'll do. Before that song, it'll be a tape of me. A tape. What am I talking about? It's an MP3, but I'm from the 80s, so whatever. It's a tape. And it was like, we'll play that. Hey guys, I'm gonna be back in 30 seconds. Let's get back on the thing. And then thunder. And dude, by the end of the thing, when that song played, everyone just went whoop right back in their seats, man. So I learned that from Raw. That's definitely the one thing I learned from Raw. What else have I learned from wrestling, man?
Well, we when certain arenas for wrestling wouldn't be full to capacity, like wrestling is so smart about how they arrange the arena or how they set it up where you can you feel like there's still a really big crowd.
Oh yeah, but everybody full behind the camera is not there or something, or the black sheets in the front or top or whatever.
So that kind of ties into like, you know, where we kind of understand, okay, for this particular session, this speaker who's kind of new, they may not have as many people, and this is kind of a big room. So let's have the hotel make sure we set it up where the chairs are only so many, so that it feels more like a full full room. So the
illusion of a huge crowd kind of deal.
Kind of. So we say, okay, let's make sure the staff comes in between sessions and moves the chairs to this setup, so that when this speaker takes the stage and the people are in the room, it feels like they're talking to still a good size group.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is there's not all these empty chairs.
Yeah.
And so like that's a wrestling thing.
It's crazy when you think about it, man. Like some of the things you make, like I remember when WWE Network launched, what year was that? Like 2016 maybe, or 17, something like that. I don't know. I remember we were just like becoming like we really focus on teaching people memberships, because I just think it's really good to have stable recurring revenue, you know, like newsletters and ad revenue, things like that. And I remember, man, when that came out, I was just so validated that he did that. Oh, I'll tell you another thing too. Yep. One thing I've always respected about Vince McMahon, especially, is how like he has to lead from the front. He's got to be the guy. Like if he's going to ask you to be thrown off the top rope, he's going to be thrown off the top rope, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that like, as my team has grown and my community has grown, and it's harder and harder to do that individual time. You just have to focus so much on being the example. Like you've got to be willing to do whatever it takes, like whether it's get chairs out at the live event, even if you're the CEO, whether it's be the guy on stage. You've got to go out on stage, even if you don't want to. Jocelyn's been really good about that. But just being like an active out front leader. Like I think that comes from Vince McMahon strutting down and letting Stone Cold stun him a few times, right? And getting sprayed with the beer hose or something, you know, man. Like you just, why would I be the guy in the back? I mean, I got to be the guy in the back and gorilla running the show. It's it. But I also need to come out and let somebody smack me in the face and throw a pie at me. You know what I mean? So like, I think that's something else I learned from wrestling too. Man, there's just so many things you could go down that rabbit hole, dude. You know, have you ever met any of those people? The McMahon.
Oh yeah. I'm not real like I'm not like fanboy when I see celebrities or anything, but if I'm in a room with Jake the Snake or somebody like that, I'm gonna be like, oh my gosh,
that's Jake the Snake.
I'm gonna turn into like super fanboy all of a sudden. I can't help it. It's like that's Ric Flair. Like woo.
Yeah, man. That's your childhood heroes, dude.
It is. So and I've seen, I won't name names, but I've seen like celebrities pretty close up, and I'm just like,
my favorite thing you do, is when you take those. What did you say? Like you take those pictures with people, and you're like, I met a guy. Like if it's like Dan Miller, you'll be like, I met a guy named Dan today. Super nice, right? It's like and it's just this like photo. But I was at WWE restaurant. Remember that restaurant that was in Times Square?
Oh yeah, I went to it.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So me and Jocelyn go there one time. I'm like, I got to go to here, Jocelyn. Let's eat lunch here. Nobody was there. It was empty. We were literally like one other couple was in the whole restaurant. It was like 11 a.m. They had just opened. Mm-hmm. And I look up and Linda freaking McMahon walks into the restaurant.
Oh, how cool.
And I was sitting there like, oh my God, that is Linda McMahon. That is the wife of Vince McMahon. I mean, it's just that the height of the McMahon family being on TV,
Yep.
So she walked and she came over she was going to every person, like the other couple and us. And she was like getting pictures. I'm like, she came over and goes, how y'all doing? Thank you so much for eating here. Just hanging out and talking. And I was like, can I get a picture of you, please? So I got my disposable camera out. This was how far away it was back then.
Yeah.
Right. And Jocelyn was taking her picture. So she goes, put your arm around me. I put my arm around her. She put her arm around me. And she goes, what's your, and as she's leaning up as Jocelyn's getting the camera ready, she goes, what's your name? And I go, oh, it's Shane. And she goes, I have a son named Shane. And I'm like, really? Yep. No, really? Because I just saw that guy get thrown off a cage at the pay-per-view last night, right? Yeah, man. I think that was one of the coolest celebrity moments I ever had. Like where
that's awesome.
I fanboyed pretty hard, like on that one. Dude.
Rightfully so. I would have as well. Yeah, so man. Yeah, that is. I love running into those guys, and I was fortunate. I got to see Bobby Heenan. Right before he passed.
Oh, that's awesome, dude.
For people that know wrestling and know Bobby the Brain.
Does Cole Cabana speak at Podcast Movement? Didn't he speak at Podcast
Oh, yeah. He's emceed some stuff for us.
Yeah, that's Colt. Right. Yeah. He's got an awesome podcast.
We have a good relationship and friendship with Colt, and he's just been really good to us, and love him, and glad to see him doing his thing in AEW. And I mean, it's really awesome. And then people like Bruce Pritchard and Conrad Thompson, we had JR and Tony Schiavone and a couple guys that were on the virtual event last year.
Oh my gosh.
That to me is so surreal. It's listening to JR giving advice on podcasting. It just made me feel good.
Yeah, man. It's like the voice of your child. It's like the voice.
It really was
of your childhood. And that's the voice. And it's like, and Tony Schiavone, like those dudes are embedded deep in my psyche, man. That's absolutely
really it was so that to me is kind of the fun part, is when you get to interact with these folks.
It just opens so many doors, man. You open
a lot of them are just like you and me. They're they're pretty down to earth, pretty humble, gracious. Not all of them, but there's a number of them that are. And it's really neat to be able to just sit and chat with. I've chatted with a few wrestlers that I looked up to growing up.
I think that's another powerful argument for podcasting in general, because one thing I have learned as a podcaster, I'm coming up on like 1,000 recorded shows. You know what I mean?
That's awesome. Yep.
The freaking doors. It's amazing who will talk to you, and it's amazing who finds you. Like just yesterday, I got this message. She's gonna probably be on my podcast. Like this girl reached out to us. She was on Shark Tank and got a deal, Damon John. And and I'm like, that person reached out to us. And I'm like, I watched you on TV get a deal on Shark Tank, and then other times where people will like say yes to talk to me. And I'm like, why did you do that? And it's just because like we put ourselves out there and we try to be in the right place so that we can be in the right place at the right time. And these crazy opportunities, like I got to meet Vince Russo. I got to actually talk to Vince Russo, like the guy who wrote Raw. And a guy in my community, man, he took me to the Hall of Fame. It's just stupid. Like if you will just turn the mic on, people, that great things will happen if you're a podcaster. It just almost can't not happen if you try hard enough, you know?
It is true. My podcasting, my podcast, I do because I want to do it, and I still do it, and it's a networking tool for me. And I interact with people that, I want to get to know better. And at this point, I'm not, using it for anything more than that, but that's what I use it for. And I love it, and I still do it, and I like it, and I'm going to keep
Well, man, I wanted to hang out with you today, and I'm glad that we got to spend so much time together, man. I just appreciate you giving me, man, so much time. We're probably, if we go down this wrestling rabbit hole any farther, this is going to get be like a 4-hour show where we're talking about old pay-per-views and stuff like that, man. But hey, listen, tell everybody, dude, where they can reach out to you, or they can learn more about Podcast Movement. I want to just give you a quick plug. I highly recommend anybody, if you want to go to a live event and you want to be a podcaster, you got to go to Podcast Movement. So shameless plug with nothing in return, but tell everybody what to do to find out how they can get a ticket and be involved.
Well, that event is in Nashville. It's August 3rd through the 6th. And really podcastmovement.com, if people want to learn more about, podcasting, and there's so many really awesome free things. Like we have a university where it's just got hours and hours of content and presentations and things that help people with their podcast. And we've got an amazing Facebook group community with over 60,000 members now, which is
incredible
unbelievable.
Great group.
And it's a very good group that's for the most part collaborative. There's a few folks in there that probably aren't as collaborative as they should be, but for the most part, it's a synergistic mindset, and people like to help each other. And you ask questions, people will help. And so, there's just a number of wonderful things that we offer. We offer a free class for people that want to learn a podcast, and we started a new one on May 4th. And, we're just always doing stuff, always got something going on, but it's a fun busy. And so podcastmovement.com, if people want to connect with me, I'm on Twitter. It's just my name, Jared Easley, at Jared Easley. That's probably a good way to do it, or LinkedIn. LinkedIn's good too. So, but I love to hear from people. I always like to meet folks, and I'm honored to be on this show, Shane, and just super proud of you and Jocelyn and your family, and how you represent yourselves, how you treat others, how you're generous. And those are things that I admire in you guys, and want to, continue to hopefully adapt into who I am and how I treat people and what I do in business too. So I appreciate your example.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
All right, guys, that wraps up my conversation with Jared Easley. What an amazing person, a family man, a businessman, a guy out there trying to change the world. Make sure you go check out podcastmovement.com. And hey, if you grab a ticket, I'm going to be there this year. Let's go hang out. Let's hang out at Podcast Movement. Talk about being podcasters. Talk about growing our podcast and meeting all the other podcast hosts that are out there changing the world. And maybe you're looking to start your movement. Maybe you want to build an online business. Maybe you want to build a membership where you can go out and you can build your community. You can help your community connect. You can teach them what you know, just like Jared did with PT, even if you're only one step ahead. I'd love to help you do that. I've been helping online business owners start, build, and grow membership websites for years. I've helped thousands of people create their content, build their membership, and start movements of their own. I'd love to help you too. You can learn more about all of that over at my brand new website, shanesams.com. That's ShaneSams.com. You can learn all about my online business coaching. You can learn about my community where I help real family-focused entrepreneurs start, build, and grow online businesses, and all of the other amazing resources that I have for everybody out there who would love to make their full-time living online, who would love to impact the world, to pick up their stone, cast it out upon the waters, cause many ripples. And heck, just like Jared did with podcasting, through the power of online business, you can start a movement of your own. All right, y'all, that is all the time we have for this episode of the show. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found today's podcast valuable. If you did, could you do me a favor? Go subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you could, please leave me a 5-star rating and a review. I read every single review, and I cannot wait to read yours. After that, go tell a friend about the podcast and have them do the same. I'd also love to connect with you on social media. You can follow me on Twitter at Shane_Sams. Feel free to tweet me at any time. And if you want to learn more about how I became a self-employed, location-independent, family-focused online entrepreneur, and if you want to find out how you can do the same, head over to ShaneSams.com, that's ShaneSams.com, and learn all about my online business coaching community. Head over to ShaneSams.com and learn all about my community and my online business coaching program. That's all I've got, y'all. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, remember these words I live by. Dream big. Take massive action. Be consistent. Be prolific. Be relentless. And do whatever it takes to take control of your life and change your family's future. I'll see you next time.